So in this video, we'll be talking about selection, the one overarching principle of biology that underlies all other fields and topics in the subject. So I have two images here, one of a bell-shaped curve, a graphical medium used to represent the frequency of a population, of a set of data. So in a biological sense, we can use this bell-shaped curve, this graph, to map out or graph out the frequencies of certain traits of organisms in a population. So I'll talk about that later in this video. Another picture I have is of Gregor Mendel. You may know him as being the father of modern genetics, but he actually implemented a form of selection without his awareness. So without him even knowing, he actually used a form of selection that I'll talk about toward the end of this video. So selection can be branched out into two main components: natural selection, which is how nature deals with evolution, and artificial selection, which is how humans have essentially selectively breeded different organisms. So natural selection consists of ecological and sexual selection. Ecological can then be branched out into stabilizing, disruptive, and directional selection. And sexual selection can be branched out into inter and intra, which is a platform where females actually determine what offspring are going to be produced in the next generation. And so, like I said, artificial selection is selective breeding. So I'll talk about Mendel and some dogs and how they're examples, quintessential examples of things pertinent to this fascinating concept of artificial selection. So ecological selection consists of directional, stabilizing, and disruptive. But before we go into any of that, I'm going to talk about what a bell-shaped curve is, in case you didn't know. So pretend you had a class population, and you told them to line up from shortest to tallest. What you would see is that there are some people, not many, but there are a little bit of people, maybe only one person, that is extremely short considering their age. So pretend you're in 10th grade, you're a sophomore in high school. There might be one person that's still 5'5" or 4'6", 4'7", and they are going to be in this minority of a population. In other words, they're in the extreme of a frequency of individuals pertinent to height. In the same way, on the other end of the spectrum, there are going to be certain individuals who are extremely tall. In other words, you might see someone who's 7 foot in your class. You might not. You also might see someone that's 6'7", and they're extremely tall. And like short people, while they may not account for the majority of the frequency of individuals, they still do exist, and so they still show up on this graph here. Most of the people, on the other hand, in your class are going to be medium-sized. They're going to be around 5'5", 5'6", 5'7", around there. So they're going to account for the majority of the population, and therefore they're going to come under this curve. That's where the bell-shaped curve, the term is coined. So directional selection is essentially when one extreme of the population. So in this example, we're going to talk about variation amongst mice population. So you're going to have a natural variation in the colors of mice in a population. It's just going to be naturally occurring. So directional selection is, again, when one extreme is eliminated. It's due to natural means. And I have a whole separate video on natural means and how certain natural factors influence populations. But in this video, all you need to know is that nature favors individuals, or favors mice in this example, that are not white. So in this new evolved population that you see in this dotted line, this dotted bell-shaped curve, there are no more white mice. So what that means is you are eliminating one end of the spectrum. Only one, though, not two. In stabilizing selection, however, both ends of the spectrum, both extremes of the spectrum are being eliminated to give you this monocurve, this one curve, this sweet spot of only one intermediary mice or mouse. So this population now is only going to consist of brown mice, no more white or black, only brown. And these arrows, by the way, represent ecological factors. So just to show that before and after, I guess. And so a practical example of stabilizing selection can be seen in babies. So if you're a mother and you're giving birth to a newborn, you don't want a newborn that's 1 or 2 pounds. because then that newborn simply won't be able to survive. So if you made a bell-shaped curve, a graph of the frequency of weights, you would see that most babies are going to be under this curve. And in fact, no surviving babies are going to be all the way over here, all the way over here. In other words, you don't want to have a 2-pound baby because that baby won't survive. Same way, you don't want to have a 20-pound baby because that baby might not make it out of the womb. In fact, probably won't make it out of the womb. So natural selection, or specifically stabilizing selection, favors babies that are in this intermediary zone. In other words, I think most babies are 6 or 7 pounds. So around that zone. In other words, you don't have any members of the population being born like extremely low as it pertains to weight, or extremely high as it pertains to weight. So the final type of ecological selection is disruptive selection. And contrary to the aforementioned directional and stabilizing, disruptive selection actually is a form of selection that eliminates the intermediary zone. So now you only have a population consisting of the two extremes, only a population of white and black mice. So as you can see now, the bell-shaped curve is essentially a flipped version of this. The evolved population curve is essentially a flipped version of this, because now these guys are going to account for the population, and no more are the brown guys going to do it. Now, sexual selection is another form of natural selection in which females have the choice. Females choose the makeup of the next generation. So in intersexual selection, you have choosiness between sexes. So inter means between. So a female, for example, in this example, will see a peacock, and the peacock will try to woo that female by displaying a vivid and exciting feathers. And what the male's trying to do essentially is tell the female, hey, look, I have these feathers, and that's an indicator that I have good genes that will be useful for the next generation, so we can make fertile offspring. And so that's the most important thing for a woman. She looks for traits in males, in mates, that could potentially make fertile offspring. And that's the goal of life, essentially, is to reproduce. In the intrasexual, meanwhile, you have fighting for mates that occurs within one sex. So in other words, these are two males, and they're fighting over, I think they're elks, actually, I might be wrong, but they're fighting over a female. So whoever wins this battle, whoever emerges the victor, will be able to tell the female, hey, look, I'm the victor. I have the genes that you need, essentially. And so the female will know that this guy is strong, and this guy will be able to provide for the family and for the next generation. So you have inter and intrasexual. Finally, I'll talk about artificial selection. What is artificial selection? It's essentially selective breeding. So when you're choosing what two organisms to breed. Now, according to my biology textbook, artificial selection is the selective breeding of domesticated plants and animals to promote the occurrence of desirable traits. In other words, you're breeding two organisms, to get desired traits that you want. Gregor Mendel, he actually was famous for crossing pea plants. And when he did that, he actually got a generation, the F1 generation, of consisting of traits that he sought, consisting of traits that he sought after. In the same way, if you have dogs and you mate those two dogs, this is a German Shepherd and this is a Corgi, you get a mix. In other words, you get a German Shepherd and a Corgi hybrid. And so you mix those dogs as humans because you want a desired trait as a hybrid. And no, you're not forcing them to mate by any means, but they will mate, and when they do, you get an organism that consists of desirable traits that you want. Alright, so that's all I have for this video, and I'll see you guys later.